News Radio 1290 WNBF.
We welcome to our studio Mason and Mick Mastroianni from BC fame. Welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well.
How's it going? Pleasure to be here.
Hey, gentlemen.
I'm really impressed with how well you pronounced our last name. I still have trouble with it myself. So
was it pretty close?
Yeah, no, that was perfect.
That was solid.
All right. Yep. I was hoping because we are live and local, and I mean, obviously, we could correct this. Any mistakes we make, we could correct for the West Coast feed. But I don't want to sit there with my editing tape and my razor blade, editing the tape here on the reel to reel. That wouldn't be a lot of fun. Anyway, we're going to focus a bit in a few moments on a special series of strips spotlighting our good friend April the Giraffe. Many of our listeners may have heard of her at Animal Adventure Park, and certainly so many people around the world have heard of April and her birthing adventure. First, though, let's talk a little bit about the BC strip. To me, it's amazing, BC having been around for 6 decades. It's a remarkable success story, and it's just remarkable, this creation of our beloved Johnny Hart. And tell our listeners a little bit of the background, as some of our listeners know the story of how BC came into being and all the work that Johnny Hart did, and some people may not be familiar with that. Tell us about your grandfather.
Yeah, he started BC as a relatively young man. He worked as an artist his whole life. He worked for Stars and Stripes in the Korean War, and he always wanted to be a comic strip artist. It was kind of a new field back then. And he copied Peanuts. He launched BC in 1958. Yep. And it took off pretty fast.
It was actually on a bet, I believe, as well. Wasn't it, Mace? It was somebody bet him he couldn't create a caveman comic strip.
Yeah. He liked caveman gags, so I guess a friend said, I bet you can't sell one. Yeah. Nobody likes cavemen. So came up with the strip, and I guess he won.
I think so.
It was, I mean, I look at some of the early strips, and you can certainly see there has been an evolution over the years. I mean, there was an evolution as he drew the strip, and then certainly more recently, too. We've seen some obvious changes. So to me, as I think back to those good old days when people in Endicott took a real sense of pride because of Johnny Hart being part of the scene, and he really, as BC became more and more successful, he also really showed that he still loved and cared so much about this community, about Endicott, about Broome County.
Oh yeah, we're all born and raised natives. He was a very community-oriented person, and in his work, I think he took great pride in doing in giving back. He spent a lot of his time doing local events. He just loved being a part of those things. And I remember growing up, I didn't know if I'd ever be a cartoonist or take on the strip. It's kind of funny that Mick and I have. But I remember that was one of the favorite parts of my childhood. It was things like the BC Open, seeing the city buses with
the BC Transit logo. I mean, everywhere you looked, BC Broome County Parks with logos, and so much with even charitable groups. For a time, the hockey team, the BC Icemen. Yep. I mean, he really allowed the community to embrace these characters, and I think those of us who I only met him a few times, and had the pleasure of being over, I think, to his home once, way back when I was young, so that was decades ago. But still, I got the sense of how much he loved the community, and he loved being able to do this because he truly did have a very special gift.
It's what I love the most, is like whenever I meet someone who knew him, I feel like there's always a story of something that he did. They're like, "Oh, Mick, I knew your grandpa, and he did this for our charitable event." And there's always a story of like not just that they knew him, but what he did for them, because he was so like generous with the.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, I love it. That's one of my favorite parts.
Well, and I, as I was preparing for your visit today, I just looked up. I came to the realization that it's just been a little over 10 years since we lost Johnny Hart.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that recently. It doesn't feel like I've been drawing the strip for 10 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's, yeah. That's amazing.
Tell me about that process, because you mentioned, Mason, that initially you didn't know that this would be your life's work. Ultimately, it turned out to be. Tell me how that happened.
Yeah, I had actually I was an illustrator for a while, and then I went and trained as a digital animator, and I had sort of just begun my career doing that when my grandfather passed away suddenly. He had cancer, but he had undergone treatment, and it looked like it was going to be good, and he suffered a stroke. So it was very sudden. We certainly weren't prepared.
No, not at all.
I came home. At the time, I was in Minneapolis, and it looked like I was going to be heading to Los Angeles shortly after that, and everything changed in a weekend. I came back home, and we got the family together and decided we were going to give this a go. And thankfully, it worked out really well.
Yep,
How were things in the early days? Was it really challenging, or did you quickly get into the groove of doing this?
It's funny. I'm a pretty good ghost, so a pretty good ghost artist. I have a lot of experience with that. So that part was lucky. I think the hardest part was for Mick and I to kind of figure out how the flavor of the gags.
Yeah,
it took
writing
us a long time.
was tough. We were trying to be just like him at first. And we're trying to write the same way that he did, but obviously, we're not the same. So, yeah, it was. We slowly kind of evolved to where we felt we could kind of add our own flavor to it. Without.
How long did it take to get basically into your own comfort zone, where you felt that it was right for you and also right for the fans of BC, that they could accept that it's no longer exclusively the work, the property of its creator, Johnny Hart?
Well, it took about 10 years and 2 weeks.
I was going to say the same thing. I think
it's still evolving, I guess.
That's funny.
Oh, it's funny. Right at first, I think, like a lot of people, it's funny. I was just listening to a Colbert interview for some reason. when he took over the latest show, how he had kind of tried so hard not to be what he used to be, and it didn't really work out for him. And I feel like that's what we did. Certainly what I did. I tried so hard to be Johnny Hart.
Yeah. And
I think that's where it's ironic that that's kind of where the difficulty was, because I think obviously you're trying to emulate somebody that is just the most amazing
yeah, we're in the
person at this craft that
we're in the shadow of giants.
Yeah.
We're speaking with BC cartoonist Mason Mastroianni and co-author Mick Mastroianni, and I guess I've read a bit in the past about how the process works for those who create the work that so many of us look forward to in our papers, or these days more and more online. Tell me how BC works. Tell me as far as what you gentlemen do, how you work together, and basically how you come up with a premise that ultimately finds its way into the hands of millions of people, whether it's in print newspapers or ultimately online a few weeks later.
That's actually one of the simpler questions to answer. It's extremely organic for us. We just kind of sit down and just come up with anything that sounds remotely silly and try to craft a gag around that. And then when I feel like drawing, I draw it. And I don't want to say that we're not busy. We certainly are, but it's kind of, it could be in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I'll be working on the strip. We don't really have any kind of set schedule. I think we tried that sort of thing for a while.
Yeah.
I know a lot of cartoonists do. It just didn't really work for us.
Yeah, it doesn't. Well, it can take like for writing. You know, you could be working on the same gag for the entire day. You know, or you could write an entire week in 30 minutes. You know, it depends on like just how your brain's working that day, and if you got a lot of funny stuff. And so it's it's a little bit. Yeah, it's definitely not like a set schedule always, but
Logistically, we have for the logistics side, we have a great team, and in our mother and in our aunt. Our Aunt Perry actually worked with her dad for about 20 years before we even came on the scene here to take over.
Yeah.
So she's been a huge asset on the back end of everything. We don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah, they keep us in line.
Yeah.
As far as the actual work, do you always work at the studio? Or, I mean, do you sometimes say, oh, I'm just going to do something here, I don't know, out in a park, as far as coming up with general ideas or whatever? I mean, day-to-day working as you prepare for upcoming daily and Sunday strips, where do you actually do, if you will, your magic?
Oh, sorry, you go.
I like to draw at this studio. We have a studio where my grandfather lived and worked. But I can draw anywhere. I do draw by hand still. It's not digital. I draw in the car while I'm driving. Things like that. No,
don't say that.
I don't condone that behavior. We
do not try this at home.
It is very fortunate that we can kind of do the job anywhere. But I certainly feel like the best work is when you're sitting in a room that inspires you, and certainly being at the studio is fits the bill for that.
Yeah.
So you're in a location that lends itself to being relaxed.
Yeah. It's a pretty good setup out there. My grandpa built the studio. He designed it himself. It's made for cartooning. It's a great setting, and I generally work there. Yeah, like I can write pretty much anywhere, but I'm generally there as well.
Do people, BC fans, sometimes approach you or submit their own little ideas and say, hey, I've got a great theme for a week, or a great punchline that you should work into a future strip? Are there a lot of people who think they have what it takes?
Do we have any fans?
We got a few, I think.
People submit gags all the time.
Yeah, especially on our Facebook page and they'll send us stuff, and once in a while I'll actually use people's ideas. I've told them that. I'm like, I don't know if you know this, Mace, but that's where I'm getting my ideas for you.
Oh wow. Okay.
Well, do you ever run into dry periods where trying to come up with something that is creative after all these years, even though you've been doing it now for several years, but prior to that, Johnny had done it for about half a century. Is it sometimes difficult to come up with something that you think is just plain funny that hasn't been mined before?
Yeah, there are dry periods. It's funny. I think after doing this for 10 years now, those dry periods are a lot more rare. But I remember there were times when I thought we weren't going to get the strip out. I just couldn't come up with anything. And Mick.
Yeah, I definitely, especially with BC. BC's it seems to me BC's particularly hard to write because it's cavemen, and they're kind of just doing their thing. You know, you got to create something from, you got to just completely create something. It's
literally a sandbox.
Yeah. Definitely have some dry spells with BC for sure.
Well, and looking, I don't think there's a simple way that, say, every day you can begin incorporating iPads and HD TVs and video games into the lives of the BC characters. I mean, I would wind up doing that at some point, and then probably the whole franchise would crash and burn within 10 days.
We do get away with a little bit of pop culture. We try to shy away from that because we like the strips to kind of live on. I mean, I guess the ultimate goal is that you'd want to be able to read the strip in 10 years and it would still be relevant and as funny as it is today.
Yeah.
But we do get away with it, especially with the ants. I don't know how well people know the strip, but the ants, I have a full community. They're kind of a sitcom, and they're more of a soap opera. But they have all kinds of technology.
Yeah,
so that gives you an opening. So although say the primary characters are not going to be sitting around watching Netflix and chilling, they maybe the ants could.
That's what I actually like about the ants is that they have full technology, like today's technology, and they just kind of look at the humans and they just laugh because they're.
Of course, BC isn't the only thing that you're involved in. I mean, right. BC is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mick actually writes The Wizard of Id, and I draw it. He's been writing The Wizard for quite a few years. And we have our third comic strip, The Dogs of Sea Kennel, which is obviously a dog strip, and that takes place today. So there's a cell phone every other day, I think.
Yeah, that's where our modern gags go. Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges facing those who put out daily strips? And obviously it's the number of people in the United States and around the world who are successful at do this, who can make a living doing what you do. It's a very small group. What are some of the biggest challenges you're facing?
I mean, I guess right now it's terrible to say, but the biggest challenge right now is obviously the contraction and the disruption of the media industry in general. But I think I don't know who said this. I think everybody in the arts knows this inherently, but the big challenge for us is that you have to be clever every day, and you have to be relevant, and when you're writing, you're not really you're writing for yourself, but you're writing to include, and you want your audience to feel like they're part of the strip and they can relate to the strip, and I think that's what Mick, you probably have something to say to that. We were just talking about that recently.
Yeah, well, that and also you got to write, you got to be current, you got to be edgy, but you can't go too far. You got, what is it?
It's kind of
you got to remember that kids are reading the paper. You can't be vulgar. You can't, so you gotta be funny, but you can't be.
Well, and every once in a while too. Every once in a while, you'll do something, and some newspaper editors take exception.
Yes, absolutely.
It's kind of funny that I think that newspapers at one point were the place where you could be a little bit cutting edge. Obviously, that's now the internet.
Yeah.
Or Comedy Central, I guess. But newspapers are kind of it's a very conservative approach to humor, and we have to be very careful. In a way, that's nice because when you see something in the paper, there's sort of a gravitas to it.
Yeah.
And people expect it to follow a format.
Yeah.
But that's where we get in trouble with humor is definitely with editors in the paper, not anything online.
Yeah, we've definitely had a few editors. Well, usually what we'll do is if we see a gag, like before it goes out, we always check them over to make sure we haven't, said something horrific. But we'll say, well, this one's a little bit edgy. We'll send them a replacement in case the editor doesn't like it, So we preempt it, just
here's one just in case you don't like the one we actually did today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Johnny Hart wasn't afraid of occasionally courting controversy, sometimes with respect to religion. I mean, that's one thing that Johnny had no problem in infusing some of his very strong religious beliefs in some of his daily strips, and especially in some of his Sunday features, especially, say, around certain Christian holidays, Easter or Christmas.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's one of the things I respected so much about the way he chose to express himself in his craft. He lost a lot of newspapers for the choices he made, but his beliefs trumped his desire to, continue that growth. This would have been in the 80s, I think, when this sort of started. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is I know we kind of live in an age of political correctness, and there's a lot of places you can't go in humor right now. You have to be very careful. That's one of the places where I think it's a little bit easier it's not what I thought would be, but we do occasionally do. We still do Christian references in the strip, especially on Easter.
Yeah, Christmas and Easter.
Christmas and Easter, yeah. And it's something that people expect and really look forward to. So we try very hard to do that.
It's very much part of what BC became under the guidance of the creator Johnny Hart.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this week's special strips. I'm guessing that a lot of people are enjoying what they've seen so far. Tell us about putting April the Giraffe from Animal Adventure Park in nearby Harpersville in the spotlight in this week's features.
This is something I can't remember where the idea came from, but do you, Mick?
Yeah, I don't remember. We just kind of were like, it just kind of happened.
I just Jordan is he's right nearby. He's a friend of ours.
Yeah, you can practically walk to Animal Adventure from where we're at.
From our studio, yeah.
Yeah.
Did he ever bring a kangaroo into your studio? Like he brought a baby kangaroo into this studio?
Hopefully soon.
Ask him.
That's awesome.
He doesn't do it intentionally. They get out the back and come over and sit. No,
yeah.
I just thought I was thinking about the old BC Open days and how when kind of a local phenomenon occurs, my grandfather made it a point to do something special in the strip. And I mean, like we were talking about earlier, it was one of the highlights of my childhood was seeing those things, and I thought, well, what a great opportunity! I just remember I was on Facebook one day, and Jordan had put up a request for someone to help him with a webcam.
Yeah.
And it must have been 2 weeks later that this thing was on like Good Morning America, and it just had exploded, this viral sensation
Worldwide.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's so neat. I'm like,
it was amazing to see.
We kind of live in the age of viral lottery, and I never really thought about how neat it would be if it happened to someone that I cared about, and here it was happening, and I'm like, I just thought, this is so cool. We have to do something to commemorate this. This is so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course Jordan in the park. I mean we've done some things with him before.
Yeah, we helped. We did a thing with him with the Wine for Wolves.
Yeah,
we gave him a couple of the character Wolf in BC prints, and seemed to go pretty well. And it was a great event. So.
Well, I think it's a great thing. As you mentioned, recalling all those special weeks where the BC Open was in the spotlight and seeing Endicott references and sometimes occasional Binghamton references with our special weather.
That's right.
Yep. It's like I grew up in Endicott and I was born in Binghamton, and I just love seeing these references in a comic strip that people are seeing not only across the United States but around the world.
Yeah,
I feel like it's a celebration of our area, and I know a lot. I mean, we're all from here, and I know sometimes it's easy to remember how things used to be a little bit different, I guess. I mean, we used to have some pretty big companies here, and a lot of people, I think it's easy sometimes to get depressed about some of the losses that the community has felt over the years.
Yeah.
And whenever there's something like this to celebrate opportunities to support a great local business, I feel like it just feels so good to be a part of it.
Yeah, a good story coming out of Binghamton,
Yeah.
A worldwide good story. It's great.
Mason and Mick Mastroianni, BC continues to be a very bright spot in Broome County and our area. Thank you for continuing the tradition that was set by Johnny Hart.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks
Appreciate
for
it.
being with us today on WNBF.
Thanks, Bob.
It's a pleasure to be here.